Hello friends, in today's video lecture we will be discussing a topic from the unit 3, that is embryology of the angiosperm, and the topic is pollination, its type and agencies or modes of pollination, right? So this is a topic from the embryology portion of the angiosperm, and we will be discussing about the pollination, different types of pollination and different modes of pollination, or you can say the agencies which bring out the process of pollination, right? So first we should look at the uh, definition of the pollination, that what is pollination. So pollination is actually the transfer of pollen grains from an anther to the stigma of the same flower or of different flowers. So please focus on this thing, that it is a transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma, and the stigma may be of the same flower or of different flower. So there can be two categories. One is known as the self-pollination, or that is also known as autogamy, and the other category of pollination, or you can see the type of pollination, is cross-pollination or allogamy. So this slide is just for the definition of the pollination, that the pollination is the transfer of pollens from an anther to the stigma of the same flower, either of different flowers. So we'll move to the next slide. So in this slide you can see a chart, and here you can see the two types of pollination. One is known as the autogamy or self-pollination. Auto means self. So autogamy stands for the self-pollination and allogamy stands for the cross-pollination. So in case of, you can see the self-pollination, the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the same flower, right? So in the same flower, pollen grains get transferred to the stigma. That means that flower is bisexual. The male reproductive part and the female reproductive part are present in the flower, and the pollen grains get transferred to the stigma in the same flower. So this type of pollination is known as the autogamy. Now let us come to the next category, that is known as the allogamy or cross pollination. In the cross pollination, actually different flowers are involved. Here the same flower, or you can say only one flower is involved. One flower, the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part of same flower. Here two different flowers are involved. So that means the pollen grains are from one flower and the stigma are of another flower. So two flowers involved, pollen grains get transferred to the stigma of different flowers, right? So this is known as the allogamy or cross pollination. Now again there are two types of cross pollination, or we can divide the cross pollination into, you can say, the two types. One is known as the gytenogamy, and the other one is known as the xenogamy, right? So this is gytenogamy and this is xenogamy. In case of gytenogamy, the flowers are two, as you can say, the different flowers, but the plant is same, right? In the same plant, two different flowers are involved. The pollen grains from one flower and the stigma of the another flower. So pollen grains from one flower get transferred to the stigma of another flower, but the plant is same. In this type of pollination, it is the cross pollination, but the category is gytenogamy, right? Now let us come to the xenogamy. In the case of xenogamy, the pollen grains of a flower get transferred to the stigma of a different flower, but this flower is situated on the different plant. That means two plants are involved, right? Plant 1 and plant 2. Both plants are of same species, but obviously they are of same species. But two plants, one flower on plant 1, the second flower on plant 2. Suppose plant 1 is having the male part and plant 2 is having the female part, likewise. So if two different plants are involved and two flowers, here the two flowers but on same plant, right? So I think this is clear now what is gytenogamy and what is xenogamy. In xenogamy, the pollen grains of a flower get transferred to the stigma of different flower but on a different plant. So that means the pollen grains from one plant and the stigma of the another plant, or two flowers are involved situated on two different plants. Here two flowers are involved, but they both are situated on the same plant. So let us move to the next slide. You just revise the slide once again and the things will be clear. Now we should discuss regarding the self-pollination. So there are some arrangements, you can say, or contrivances in the plant which are for self pollination, or you can say there are some conditions or some adaptations which make easier the self pollination. So self pollination become easier due to some kind of arrangements or contrivances. And what are they? We will discuss one by one. One is bisexuality or hermaphrodite. Bisexuality is more good technical term in case of plants. So bisexuality means the flower is showing the both type of reproductive part, male reproductive part and female reproductive part. If this kind of condition is there, so self pollination can take place. Now another is homogamy. Homogamy term stands for the both the sex organs, they mature at the same time. So maturity of the male sex organ and the female reproductive part at the same time, so it leads to the self pollination. Okay, so two conditions, one is bisexuality and the other is homogamy. Now there is third term which is known as the cleistogamy. It is a very important and very interesting thing, cleistogamy. So first we will see few plants. One is oxalis, the commelina, Erecus hypogea. So these are some plants in which this kind of thing occurs. Here you can see that there are two types of flower. Some flower, these are situated in the underground. These are known as the cleistogamous flower. These are which are situated below the ground surface, underground, below the soil, you can say. These are cleistogamous flower. And some flowers are situated in the aerial part or above the soil. These are known as the chasmogamous flower. And these are the underground flower known as the cleistogamous, and these are the normal flower known as the chasmogamous. So you see that in case of these underground or the closed flower, the situation is like that the pollen grains are liberated and the anthers get matured when the flower is closed. So when the flower is closed, see, when the flower is closed, the pollen grains they get liberated, and because the anther get matures and it liberates the pollen grains due to the bursting of the anther walls in the closed flower condition. So these underground flowers known as the cleistogamous, and the aerial flowers, these aerial flowers which are normal flowers or you can say the chasmogamous flower, these are the normal plants. They are larger, they are brightly in color, they are scented, and they show the cross pollination. So both type of pollinations are there, here the cross and here the self, because the anthers get liberated in the closed condition. So if both type of flowers are present, the plants showing the both type of flowers, chasmogamous and cleistogamous, such type of flowers are known as the chasmo-cleistogamous flower. So this is also a condition where the self pollination can take place. Now let us move to the next slide. Right, now we will discuss about the cross pollination, or you can say the allogamy. Right, so here also some adaptations or some features or contrivances through which the cross pollination can occur. So one is, you see, unisexuality. Right, if the flower is unisexual, that means either it is showing you the presence of stamens, either carpels. That means either the male reproductive part is present, either the female reproductive part is present, and these both parts are present on the different flower, then this condition is unisexuality or unisexual flower. So when the male and female flowers are formed on the same plant, then those are known as the monoecious plant, like in maize or cucurbita. And when male and female flowers are born on different plant, this is known as kind of dioecious plant. And the example is, you can see the carica papaya, this is papita, cannabis sativa. So both these conditions, monoecious and dioecious, they lead to the cross pollination. Okay. Now second thing, or you can say the second contrivances, is self sterility or incompatibility. In this condition, what happens, the pollen grains are there, but they are incompatible to fertilize their ovules, so they do not germinate on the stigma of the same flower. So if this condition occurs, that the pollen grains of the same flower, they are unable to fertilize the stigma, or they don't germinate on the tip of the stigma and they don't form any pollen tube, so the fertilization cannot take place. So this is known as the self sterility or incompatibility. Right, so if this condition will also lead to the cross pollination. Now the second thing is this is the third point, dichotomy. In many hermaphrodite flowers, stamen and carpels of the flower do not mature at the same time. So maturity of the both parts, stamens and carpels, does not occur at the same time. So if they don't mature at the same time, that means fertilization cannot occur. So again, there are two terms if you want to remember. One is protogyny and the other is protoandry. So in the case of protoandry, the anthers matures earlier, and in the case of protogyny, the carpel matures earlier. Proto stands for prior and andry stands for androecium, or you can say the male part. And here also the proto stands for the prior and the gyne stands for the female part. That means in case of protandry condition, the male part or anthers mature first and the carpels mature later. So maturity of the both sex organs doesn't coincide with each other, then how you can say the fertilization can take place? So here again, this is a condition in which nature has developed in the plant, where the cross pollination becomes the essentiality for the plant. In the same case, in protogyny, the cross pollination becomes an essentiality. The cross pollination can lead to the fertilization because the carpels matures first and the stamens mature later, right? So there are few examples you can read over here: Tagetes, sunflower, here ficus, polyalthea. So you can take one or two examples, but the main thing is you should learn for the these kind of contrivances. What are those? For example, unisexuality, the flower are monoecious, dioecious plant, self-sterility, they are unable to sterilize each other, that is incompatibility, either the protandry, protogyny condition, right? So these are the some conditions which are for cross pollination. Now heterostyly, again a term, heterostyly. So heterostyly means the style regard to it is regarding to the length of the style and length of the stamen. If the style is, you can say, is longer than the stamen, or so the flowers cannot bring about an effective pollination, just as a in the case of, you can see the oxalis, primula. So these are some example. So you can write down these 3 4 points regarding the contrivances, why the cross pollination is occurring, or due to what conditions in the plant the cross pollination takes place. So you can just write down these things: unisexuality, then self sterility, then dichogamy, that means the maturation of the female part or male part earlier than the other one, and here the change in the length of the stamens and style. Okay, now let us move to the next slide. Now, hercogamy. What is hercogamy? Hercos means barrier. So, there is a physical barrier present which prevents the self pollination. And thus, the only thing which is possible is cross pollination. So, I have given you two examples over here. You can see. One is Calotropis. This is also known as a milkweed. This is a plant belonging to the Asclepiaceae family, and the other one is orchids, where only cross pollination is possible. Why cross pollination is possible? Due to a term we are saying, hercogamy. Hercos means barrier. So there are some features in those plant structure, or you can say the flower structure, which prevents the self pollination. So when self pollination cannot occur, the cross pollination is only choice left. And why the cross pollination is occurring? Due to the hercogamy, due to a physical barrier. So let us move to the next slide and we will discuss the agencies of cross pollination, how the cross pollination can occur, right? So here are few agencies. We can say that the transference of pollen grain from anther to the stigma can take place by the wind, right? By the wind, by the water, by insects, by birds, and by bats, right? So you can see over here that if the transference of pollen grains from anther to the stigma takes place through wind, then it is anemophily. If water agency is involved, then this is hydrophily. If insects are involved, this is entomophily. If birds are involved, ornithophily, and birds are chiropterophily. You know, there is a order, chiroptera, in the case of mammals classification. So bats are actually mammals, where the wings are present. So they are included in the order chiroptera, and the name is also chiroptera. So chiropterophily means the cross pollination with the help of bat. So we will discuss one by one. Let us see. Now we will first discuss about the wind pollination, or you can say the anemophily. So in case of anemophily, there are some actually the characteristic feature of flower, you can say. The flower is small and inconspicuous, right? Small and inconspicuous flower, large amount pollen grains are present, and the pollen grains are actually very light, they are dry, and the anthers are versatile. Versatile means the anthers swing in the air, or they oscillate in the air in all directions, so that the liberation of the pollen grains can take place with the help of air, or you can say wind pollination can occur. And the stigma in these kind of flowers, it is very large and feathery. So because it is large and feathery, it will catch the pollen grains which are present in the wind. So these are kind of something, or you can say some arrangements in the flower which leads to the anemophily or wind pollination. There is an example of maize over here. You can see this diagram which is showing you the maize plant. What happens, the maize pollen grains are very large and they are heavy, so they get fallen down from above just through the light shake of the wind. But because the female flowers, they are born on the lower side, or you can say on the lateral position, and the male flowers, they are present on the terminal position. So when these pollen grains they fall from the terminal part, they fall down and they land on the stigma, which is actually hairy and situated on the filiform long silky style. So this hairy stigma, it will catch the pollen grains which will form from the upper side, because pollen grains are heavy. So this is kind of arrangement in the pollen. So this is the pollination in maize. So you can give one example of maize also, in which case the pollen grains are large. But in the case of wind pollination, generally the pollen grain should be very light and the amount is very large. So I have discussed one plant, that is maize. Now let us discuss about the hydrophily. Now, as I told you in the previous slide, that hydrophily means the pollination occurs in the water. So there are few examples I have given over here. One is ceratophyllum. You can see here ceratophyllum, zostera, najas, vallisneria. It is also known as the ribbon weed. So these are the plants in which the hydrophily occurs, or pollination inside the water. So there are two types, hypohydrophily and epihydrophily. Two types are there. You can see over here. In the hypohydrophily, actually, the plants are pollinated inside the water, right? They are already, we are talking about the hydrophytes. So in the hydrophytes, hydrophily will take place, and plants are situated inside the water, so they get pollinated inside the water. One example is ceratophyllum, najas, and zostera. But in case of epihydrophily, there is a one very good example, you can say, and which is the Vallisneria spiralis. It is known as the ribbon weed. एक प्लांट है जिसका नाम है वेलिसनेरिया स्पाइरालिस, जिसको रिबन वीड भी कहते हैं. इट इज अ सबमर्ज प्लांट एंड इट इज अ dioecious plant, right? Flowers are born under water. So what happens, when they get matured, the male flower, it get detached from the parent plant. So male flower get detached from the parent plant, either although it is situated in the submerged condition. So it get detached and it comes on the surface of the water, and it floats on the surface of the water. And what happens to the pistillate flower, female flower, they also develop underwater. But at the time of pollination, they are brought to the surface, they come to the surface not by the detachment, as in case of male flower, which is detached from the parent plant. In case of female flower, or you can say the pistillate flower, they are brought to the surface of the water through their long and cylindrical stalk, right? So they come on the surface, and when these female flower, they come on the surface, they form a cup-like depression, a depression area, or you can say a cup-like structure. And these male flowers, which are floating on the surface of the water, they get lodged into this depression. And because they get lodged into this depression, the pollination takes place. And when the pollination occurs, after the pollination, what happens, this stalk, this long stalk of the long and cylindrical stalk of the female plant, it undergoes a spiral kind of torsion. It's spirally wound around itself, torsion occurs, and it brings down the pollinated flower once again under the water. So this is a very interesting example of epihydrophily. Okay, so hydrophily means the plants which are situated inside the water, and the pollination also occurs inside the water. One is the ceratophyllum, najas, and zostera. In case of epihydrophily, the Vallisneria spiralis is an example. As you can see, epi means क्योंकि इसके अंदर pollination कहाँ हो रहा है, फिर से जरा इसको एक बार हिंदी में देखिएगा. कि वेलिसिनेरिया स्पाइरलिस, जिसको आप रिबन वीड कह रहे हैं, ये एक सबमर्ज प्लांट है, ठीक है। तो इसके जो फ्लावर्स हैं वो पानी के नीचे ही होंगे, लेकिन जब वो मैच्योर हो जाएंगे, जो मेल फ्लावर्स हैं, तो वो क्या करेंगे, मेन प्लांट से डिटैच हो जाएंगे और डिटैच होकर प्लांट की, या सॉरी, जो वाटर की सरफेस है उसके ऊपर आ जाएंगे। यानी ये जो मेच्योर मेल फ्लावर्स हैं ये प्लांट से डिटैच हो जाएंगे और सरफेस पर आ जाएंगे, और ये सरफेस पर आएंगे, और तब तक जो फीमेल फ्लावर्स होंगे वो भी वाटर के नीचे ही डेवलप कर रहे हैं, लेकिन वो क्या करेंगे, वो डिटैच नहीं होंगे। पॉलिनेशन के टाइम में उनकी जो सिलेंड्रिकल स्टॉक है वो इतनी लंबी हो जाएगी कि वो भी सरफेस पर आ जाएंगे, और सरफेस पर वो एक जो है कपले कुछ डिप्रेशन टाइप का एक शेप बना लेंगे, ताकि कि जो मेल फ्लावर्स है जो ऑलरेडी फ्लोटिंग कंडीशन में है वो उसके अंदर लॉज हो जाएं, और जैसे ही वो उस डिप्रेशन में जाके बैठ जाएंगे ये जो मेल फ्लावर्स हैं, तो पॉलिनेशन हो जाएगा। अब जैसे ही पॉलिनेशन का कार्यक्रम खत्म होगा, तुरंत जो ये पिस्टिलेट फ्लावर हैं ये एक तरह से स्पाइरल शेप बना करके अंदर की तरफ एक स्पाइरली अरेंजमेंट शो करेंगे, जिससे ये फिर अंदर की तरफ घुस जाएंगे। यानी कि पॉलिनेशन के बाद फ्लावर फिर अंडर वाटर हो जाएगा, क्योंकि पॉलिनेशन ऊपर हुआ है ना, इसलिए इसका नाम है एपीहाइड्रोफिली, राइट। So we have discussed regarding the epihydrophily. Now we should discuss the third point, which is known as the entomophily. The entomophily stands for the pollination which is brought about the insects. So generally bees are involved, flies are involved, and you can say the wasp, moth, these are involved for the pollination. And the flowers which shows the pollination through insects, they are generally colored and they have large amount of nectar, they show special type of smell. So these are few things which you can add in the entomophily. And the pollen grains are sticky, they are sticky, and they are with spinous exine. You know why sticky and spinous? Because if they are sticky they can easily stick to the legs of the insects which come and feed on the flower nectar. So we'll move to the next slide, right. So in this slide you can see that example एपीहाइड्रोफिली इन वेलिसिनेरिया, जो अभी हम लोगों ने देखिए दिखा था। ये देखिए मेल पार्ट है, फ्लावर का नीचे है, ये बाद में डिटैच होकर के देखिए ऊपर आ जाएगा। जो फीमेल फ्लावर है उसकी स्टॉक इतनी लंबी है कि वो सरफेस के देखिए ऊपर आ गई है, और ऊपर ही पॉलिनेशन होगा, उसके बाद ये यहाँ पर ऐसे स्पायरल मूवमेंट करके ये अंदर की तरफ चला जाएगा। सो दिस इज एपीहाइड्रोफिली, अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एग्जाम्पल, वेलिसिनेरिया। Okay. Now in the case of entomophily, you can see this is the case of calotropis and orchid. In case of calotropis also the entomophily occurs, and in case of calotropis also the entomophily occurs. We have already discussed a point in the previous slide, that was hercogamy. As I told you, there was a barrier present. Now you can see over here, this is a plant. This is the stigma actually. It is in the form of a pentagonal disc. Stigma is a pentagonal disc, and these points which are present at the pentagonal disc, at this point corpusculum is present. It is a gland-like structure, glandular structure, and and here also the pollinium is present. Look here, this is pollinium. This is a disc-like structure, and this is cortical. This stalk is known as the cortical, and these are the pollinia. These are the pollinia in which the pollen grains are present, and at all the 5 tips this structure is present. This structure is present which is known as the gynostegium. So you can see that this is the stigmatic disc, this is the united style, and the pollinia are present over here at the pentagonal disc, at these points at the pentagonal disc. So when the insects come here to visit the plant, this pollinium, this gets stick to its legs, and they transfer the pollinium from one plant to another. So this is a kind of entomophily, or you can say the pollination brought about the insects. ठीक है. Now let us move to the next type. This is known as the orchid. Here is one example of, you can say, the orchid. In case of orchid, you can see over here that these are the orchid plant. Look here, I'll show you this one, Ophrisia. This is a Ophrisia muscifera. Ophrisia muscifera. This is the actually the diagram, and this is the plant in the natural condition. Ophrisia muscifera. These are the orchids. Now you can see the plant. Its shape is like the female insect. So in this plant, what happens? The shape of the flower, or you can say the flower, it mimics the female of the pollinator insect. So the pollinator insect thinks that it is a female insect and it comes and lands over here, and this also secretes some kind of attractant which also attract the insect. It is just like the pheromones, the attractant which is secreted by these plants. So what happens, these flower they mimic like a uh, insect, pollinating insect, a female part of the pollinating insect, and male thinks that it is a female and it comes over here, lands over here, and it carries some of the pollinum through its wings. And when the same male insect goes and visits some another plant, then it brings out the pollination. So in this case, in orchids, they also show a kind of mimicry. So mimicry is present in orchids, where the this flowers they mimic like the female insect, right? Now here you can see this is the diagram for the salvia, and this is a diagram for the yucca. Now I will discuss in both one by one. In the case of salvia also, the bees, or you can say the insects, they are involved in the pollination. And here in case of yucca also, the pronuba moth is involved for the pollination. So these are the example of pollination through insect, and these are also example of the हर्कोगेमी. मैंने आपको पिछली स्लाइड में बताया था हर्कोस मीन्स बैरियर. तो कोई ऐसा बैरियर है जिसकी वजह से इसमें इस तरह से पॉलिनेशन हो रहा है. अब क्या बैरियर है उसको देखिएगा. और पॉलिनेशन की एजेंसी क्या है, एजेंसी एक इंसेक्ट है. जैसे सैल्विया के केस में बीज हैं. In case of salvia, you can see the corolla is actually the bilobed, and two stamens are present, and they are attached to the tube of the corolla in this case, and one anther lobe of each anther is fertile and half is sterile. So one lobe is sterile and one lobe is fertile. So these sterile halves of both anthers, both two anthers are present. So the sterile half of both anthers, they form a plate of sterile tissue which is placed on the lower side, or you can say here lower side of the flower. So fertile anther lobes are situated on the upper side of the flower, and the sterile are here. So when the bees come and they lands on the lower lip, it pushes the sterile plate to the lower end. So the fertile portion of the anther, they already comes down due to the due to, you can say, this pressure, and it touches the back of the bee. So whenever bee comes over here and it sits over there, due to its pressure it comes down, and this portion also comes down, and the fertile portion of the anther lobe, it comes in the contact with the bee. So the back of the bee, it transfers the pollen grains to the stigma of the another flower. So this is a kind of hercogamy also, and transfer for the pollen grains, because whenever bee lands over at this portion, this is the, you can say, the sterile portion, and so due to the pressure it also comes down, and the upper lip also comes down of the corolla, and the pollen grains get transferred to the back of the bee. So this is case of salvia and bees, right? Now here this kind of corolla is known as actually the bilobed corolla, right? Bilobed दो है ना, तो this is bilobed. Now let us come to the next example, that is a yucca. So in case of yucca, the pollination occurs by a moth which is known as the pronuba moth. Here you can see the condition is obligate relationship. Why obligate relationship? Because moth cannot complete its life cycle without the association with the yucca flower, and yucca has no another pollinator. So yucca needs moth, this particular moth known as pronuba, for the pollination, and the moth also needs yucca flower. So it is kind of, you can say, the obligatory interaction, which is reciprocal kind of symbiosis. So it is the obligatory biotic interaction and reciprocal symbiosis. Here what happens, the female moth, it visits the yucca flower during night, and these flower are actually in the pendulous condition, and the pollen grains are in the form of, you can say, the balls. So it is the female comes and it lays its eggs inside the, you can say, the ovary of the flower, because the temperature of the ovary is such like it is suitable for the hatching of this moth, or you can say the pronuba moth, for the egg of the pronuba moth. So whenever the moth comes inside the flower, so what it does, it pierces its ovary into the ovipositor, into the ovary, and lays its eggs. and the moth comes out, and when the moth comes out after laying the eggs, it brings the uh, pollen balls along with it, and when it comes out, it pushes those pistillate flower, or you can say the pistil of the flower, and it brings about the pollination. So this kind of pollination occurs in case of yucca. So female is coming here, the female moth, प्रोनिवा मॉथ इस फ्लावर को विजिट करेगी, क्योंकि उसको अपने लार्वा को, अपने एग्स को इसकी ओवरी के अंदर ले करना है। जब वो उसके अंदर एंटर करेगी एग्स को ले करने के लिए, तो उसके साथ जो है कुछ उसकी बैक पर पॉलन के बॉल्स लग जाएंगे, और जब वो बाहर आएगी तो दोनों के बीच में जो है इंटरेक्शन हो जाएगा स्टाइल और पॉलन ग्रेन्स में, और पॉलिनेशन हो जाएगा। अब इसको हम लोगों ने ऑब्लिगेटरी रिलेशनशिप क्यों कहा है? क्योंकि इसके पास कोई और पॉलिनेटर है ही नहीं। यक्का के पास एक ही पॉलिनेटर है, विच इज नोन एज प्रोन्यूबा मॉथ, और प्रोन्यूबा मॉथ अपनी एगलेइंग इसी के अंदर करता है। दैट्स व्हाई इट इज एन obligate relationship, right? It is an nutritive reciprocal kind of symbiosis, or you can say this is obligatory biotic interaction, right? Now, some other type of pollination, ornithophily, which occurs through the birds. In case of some plants, you can see here some examples are there. Bignonia. Then one plant is known as the bird of paradise. It is known as Erythenia cerulidea. So, in these plants, the tiny birds, or you can say hummingbirds, are involved for the pollination. Chiropterophily, it is pollination by the bats. So, in case of bats, the Entomophilus, कदम के प्लांट में, जिसको एंथोसिफिलस कहते हैं, पॉलिनेशन किसके द्वारा होगा? बैट्स के द्वारा होगा। इट इज नोन एज द कैरेप्टोफिली। व्हेन द पॉलिनेशन इज टेकन प्लेस बाय विद द हेल्प ऑफ स्नेल्स, सो इट इज नोन एज द मेलाकोफिली। सो there is one more term over written over here. The largest flower is Rafflesia, but in case of Rafflesia, the pollination also occurs by the carrion flies. They are type of insect. So carrion flies जो है they pollinate the Rafflesia. Thank you.